Hi everyone, I'm going to start there. So introduce Thom Norman, who's going to say what we can do about factory farming. So Thom is the co-founder of FarmKind, a donation platform focused on improving the welfare of factory farmed animals by connecting donors with super effective charities. Through FarmKind, Thom helps users make a meaningful impact by splitting their donations between personally favoured charities and top-rated animal welfare organisations, while also boosting the donations. Before co-founding FarmKind, Thom went through the charity entrepreneurship incubation programme, where he launched the high-impact charity with his co-founder. He has a diverse background that includes working as a solicitor in the government legal department in the UK, where he gained experience in judicial reviews, private litigation and public law. His prior roles include senior account management positions in communications, helping startups and mid-sized organisations with PR, digital marketing and securing media coverage in outlets like Financial Times and Bloomberg. Thom holds a Master of Laws from Birkbeck, University of London, and a legal practitioner's course distinction from BPP Law School. I had the pleasure of seeing a talk from Thom recently, and what struck me was the kind of innovative approach. It was really interesting across all cause areas. So please do enjoy the talk and submit any questions for Slido and upvote as we go. So I'll pass it on.
Hi, I'm going to start by pressing the button to go up. Fantastic. Right, so what I want to do is start off with a thought experiment that I think will be somewhat familiar. Imagine you're walking along through a park and you come across a lovely lake. And fortunately, there are no children drowning in the lake today. That's good. You get to keep your shoes. But instead, you see near the lake a little bird that's in a cage. It's got some food, it's got some water, but it's stuck in the cage. The cage is so small that it can't even open its wings. It can't really move around, and you can't see anyone around. No negligent parents, but there's definitely a negligent bird owner today. So you reach around in your pockets, and you've got a 50p, and you think you can just about pick the lock for this cage with your 50p, but it's probably gonna, you're not an expert lockpick, the 50p will be trashed, and you were gonna donate that to AMF. So what you can do is you can give your 50p to AMF Against Malaria Foundation, or you can save this little bird from this cage. Now, I'm not here to tell you which of those options is the right one, but actually, when it comes to farmed animals, this is actually kind of where we are. So it costs about 50 pence, 85 cents, to save one chicken from a life stuck in a cage. So when we're thinking about farmed animals, I think the key thing, the thing I really want to start with, is that you can do an extraordinarily large amount of good with an extraordinarily small amount of money or other resources. And I think this is a good place to start when we're thinking about the issue of factory farming and what we can do about it. So, as you mentioned, I'm Thom, I'm the co-founder of FarmKind. What we try and do is help people who care about animals to find ways to help on the issue of factory farming without changing your diet. So, one of the key things that people talk about when it comes to animals is like, go vegan. Dustin mentioned it yesterday. It's probably not the most effective thing you can do. We agree with this. We don't think it's a bad thing, but it's not the most effective thing. So what we try and help people to do, particularly, is to donate to super effective charities that can make a really big difference in the lives of factory farmed animals and to this problem overall, moving us towards a world without factory farming. Now, when it comes to factory farming, we talk to a lot of people about this issue. And the big thing that comes up, whether it's talking to EA people or just sort of people in the public, is almost nobody thinks yeah, factory farming is great, I'm pro-factory farming. What they do think is that there's just nothing we can do about it. It seems such a big problem, and in fact, this is actually the scale, this is an aerial photograph of a factory farm, just to underline the literal size of the problem. That it can feel like there's nothing we can really do about this, it's just outside of our control. And I think one of the exciting things about the sort of effective approach that we take within this kind of community is that we can start to move past that and say, well, actually, this issue is kind of tractable if you work on the right project, we take the right approaches, we look at the evidence, we look at what can work, we can actually make quite a lot of progress on this issue. And indeed, I think that the end of factory farming is on, if we look at a broad enough timescale, more or less inevitable. And actually, our project is to try to speed that up so that factory farming does as little damage for animal suffering and for other things as possible. Not the question of like, can this be done? It's how quickly can we do this? So today I want to go through kind of three key things. Firstly, I'm going to start with why I care about this issue. I'm sure many of you, this won't be super new, but just in case you're new to this issue, I want to start there, because while Dustin talked about why we should care about animal suffering yesterday, factory farming isn't just about animal suffering. So I'm going to go into kind of some of the other issues and the other reasons you might care about this issue, even if animals aren't your top priority. Then we're going to go through some broad themes about the things that I think that we think at FarmKind are particularly effective kind of strands of interventions, the things that we're excited about, and then finally just some practical stuff about what you can do if you want to make an impact yourselves with your career and with your life on this issue. So firstly, as I say, factory farming is not just about animal suffering. It affects people, the planet, and animals. So to start with the planet, you may know that animal agriculture, of which factory farming is like the vast majority, so they're not entirely interchangeable, but like it's pretty close, certainly in the West, is responsible for between 14 and 90% of global greenhouse gas emissions, depending on who you ask and when you ask them, which is more than the transport sector. This is a combination of direct emissions from animals, so cows and sheep particularly produce a lot of methane, but it's also nitrogen oxide from fertilizers is a big part of this question as well, and then also deforestation. So when you're housing animals in warehouses indoors and you want them to grow as quickly as possible and produce as many animal products as possible, what you need to do is feed them on the most high protein rich food sources you possibly can. So what we do as a world is we cut down large amounts of rainforest and we use most of our agricultural land, it's about 80% of our agricultural land, to grow crops that we then feed to animals. So we feed most of our soy, not to the vegans, but in fact to chickens, and we feed a lot of crops like corn to animals like cows. This allows us to produce animal products much more quickly, but it is massively inefficient in terms of producing calories and producing protein. So we feed, I need to get this one right, so we feed about 80% of the land we use to produce crops is those crops that we then feed to animals. And this produces only about 17% of global calories, about 37% of the world's protein supply. So as a way of producing things we can eat, this is pretty inefficient. This deforestation has a number of problems with it. It obviously leads to a lot of biodiversity loss. We've all seen, the sad orangutans and things like this. But it also is, forest land is one of the best carbon sequestering forms of land use. And so not only is animal agriculture producing a lot of greenhouse gas, it's also making it harder for the planet to cope with the greenhouse gases that we are producing. The exciting thing about this, of course, is that if we can roll back the amount of animal agriculture we're using, this is making a big difference. So methane is one of the greenhouse gases that breaks down in the atmosphere fastest. And we will be able to send a lot of land potentially back to forest land, which means we could actually make quite a big inroad, potentially start reversing climate change more broadly as an issue, if we could get a grip on this question of animal agriculture. So it's both a massive problem, but also an opportunity. Factory farming is a problem particularly for our health. We all remember the pandemic of a few years ago. Well, the thing is, most pandemics are zoonotic diseases, so they start off in animals. And when you cram lots and lots of animals together in very small spaces, in very unhygienic conditions, these are like perfect ways of producing new diseases. So we currently, as a world, are dealing with bird flu, a pandemic there, which is going on still largely in animals. By keeping our cows and our poultry in such small conditions, we're making it much, much more likely that this disease will mutate into something that can then it already makes the human jump, but can make the human to human jump bird flu is factors of magnitude more deadly than COVID. So this is like something we should be somewhat nervous about. And as a world, I think it's kind of crazy that we're not really having a discussion about this particularly. But in general, animal agriculture is responsible for a large number of historic pandemics. It's also a leading contributor, not the only, but a leading contributor to the problem of antimicrobial resistant diseases. So, superbugs, these are, by some estimates, going to be the leading cause of human deaths by 2050. And we feed a large amount of antibiotics to animals to try to stop them from getting diseases, which is a terrible way to ensure that our antimicrobial drugs remain effective. So, by maintaining factory farming specifically, we are endangering our own health and the health of generations to come in two very, very key ways that we have seen recently as absolutely live issues and risks that we need to take very seriously. So even if you don't care about animal suffering, I think you should really care about factory farming, because it is arguably, if you're one of these people who's working on biosecurity, this is like one of the key biosecurity risks that we face in the world today. And then finally on this, actually, so the Archbishop yesterday was asked about factory farming, and he said, well, we've got to keep food cheap for people. People have to eat, and I agree with this. I think we can all agree people do need to eat. But factory farming is actually making it harder for us to feed the world, not easier. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's a very bad way of creating human edible food, because there's a lot of energy loss in the process of feeding crops to animals and then animals to people. And by some estimates, if we switch to an entirely plant-based diet, we could feed, with the same amount of agricultural land we currently use, 4 billion more people than we currently do. So you can imagine that in producing cheaper food, for example, or using less land to feed our population. So quite apart from global poverty, global hunger being a reason we need to keep factory farming, it is exactly another reason to deal with this problem right now. And then finally, I think we obviously can't leave this issue without talking about animals. So the bad news is that overall, more animals are being farmed now than ever before, and that trend, as you can see here, is going in entirely the wrong direction. In particular, it's going in the wrong direction in places like Asia and Africa, where there are the least protections for animals, so we can expect, broadly speaking, that their lives are some of the worst. So this is quite sad. But the good news, as I've said, is we are increasingly finding interventions that are cost-effective and making a big difference in the lives of animals. And so we are seeing, I think, and I'll go on to this later, but we are seeing a roadmap to how we can start to deal with these things. And I think both as a community interested in effectiveness and the wider animal movement, things like the importance of looking at the developing world and how we can work there are becoming much more salient issues. And so I'm hopeful that on the long term we can deal with this issue. But I think we can't get away from the fact that about 100 billion animals are farmed each year. In the US, 10 billion animals are farmed, and 99% of those are in factory farms. In the UK, the estimates are around 70-80% of our animals are in what you call factory farm. These are obviously the worst cases of industrial farming for animals. So we're talking about animals that can't really have very little chance to move. They have no ability to exhibit their own natural behaviours. Things like very simple things for a chicken, like for example, being able to dust bathe, which is how they clean their feathers. This is not a thing that many of these animals have the space to do. They are subject to diseases. It is completely common if you're on a factory farm to assume that a percentage, so 8% or something like this, of the animals that you have in your farm will not make it old enough to be slaughtered because they will die too early. For example, with chickens, it's very common, we genetically breed them now so they grow so quickly to produce so much meat that their bone structure and their internal organ structure can't keep up with the size of their bodies, and so you have well-recorded instances of chickens that are literally unable to move by the time they reach slaughter weight, and they are sitting on the floor of the barn, which is covered in chicken droppings, and so are getting phosphorus burns on their bodies. They're losing their feathers because of this, and because it's an extremely stressful and unnatural environment for animals to be in. And this is the reality for literally billions of sentient beings every year. Now, we're going to move on to some of the more positive bits, because I think we don't want to dwell too much on these things. I think if you sort of aren't aware of kind of the state of fact farming, I think it is good to educate yourself. But once you already know, I think I'm very much of a fan of if you already know, you don't have to kind of subject yourself to this stuff too much, because it can be psychologically extremely wearing to do so. So, what can we do about this problem? I want to start with two sort of broad buckets of where I think the work needs to be done and where I think it's particularly exciting. The first is welfare, so dealing with how animals are today. As I said, we have a lot of animals in effective farming. Currently the trends are in the wrong direction. To ignore the lives of those animals now and not to work to try and improve their welfare would be to essentially write off the lives of hundreds of billions of animals. So it's very important that we improve the lives of animals today, if we can, but it's also important that we look to the future and find ways to try to move past the era of factory farming and build a food system that is sustainable, can feed people healthily, and does not rely on these particularly cruel practices for food. And so that's the way I conceptualize the two sort of strands of work that we're going to be talking about is, are we moving towards a factory farm food future? And are we helping animals today in a cost-effective manner? And I think both of these pieces of work are really important. So, the regions of out and factory food future. So the first, I'm going to talk about three kind of broad strands of work. First of these, Dustin touched on yesterday, and it's kind of the archetypical when you think about an effective thing to do in the space, which is corporate campaigning. So, the Humane League, I think, is a particularly good example of this. They're an organisation that works in the UK and in America, and they work on two main projects, which is cage-free, so trying to get egg-laying hens out of cages, and so they live their lives still not in great conditions often, in a barn, but significantly better, we think, than living in a cage. By some estimates, 60% of the suffering of an egg-laying chicken can be attributed to life in a cage. So potentially this is very, very impactful. Although, as a caveat to that, there are some chats these days that maybe actually there are some things that are worse, like heel bone fractures with living outside a cage. So yeah, I don't want to there are some people who might disagree with me about this being particularly effective, but just to put that to the side. So we have the egg laying, the cage-free campaigns, and they also work on what's called the Better Chicken Commitment, which is for meat chickens who don't generally live in cages, but do have particularly bad lives. As I say, the genetic modification is a particular issue for these animals, as is the overcrowding, the lack of stimulation for them in their lives, these kinds of things. And so these are the two main campaigns that the Humane League works on. How they do it is they pressure companies who buy animal products, so for example KFC or Burger King, something like this, like Tesco's, and they say you need to sign up to eliminate caged eggs from your supply chain, or sign up to the Better Chicken Commitment and ensure that all the chicken meat that you buy meets these standards. These campaigns have been extraordinarily successful in terms of what they've achieved. So there are 2,400 corporate commitments around the world in 70 countries. This is both the Humane League and the broader movement called the Open Wing Alliance, which they help to spearhead, which is working on this all across the world. So the number of companies that have filled through on their commitments according to THL is around the region of 85% to 89%. So quite a strong level of follow through. And that's thanks to the work both of THL and other organisations that are helping companies to meet their commitments. But this seems to be quite an effective way to get companies to move on their practices, which is very exciting. And the outcomes of this in the cage are to move from this kind of thing here, so this is a chicken in a cage, to this kind of thing. So this is obviously not representative of most chickens, particularly in America, but a surprisingly large number of chickens in the UK are, if they're not in cages, they are free range. And so this is like not too far away from what things will look like for, certainly for a British chicken if you're egg laying. This is like obviously like kind of where we wanted to get to. And these are the numbers roughly of what change has been made over the past decade. And this is pretty extraordinary. So you have to also imagine that the total number of egg laying chickens over this period has gone up. So these are like not only percentage increases, but a larger percentage of a larger number of birds, which is quite extraordinary. For a very small organisation to be leading this is really quite an achievement. And it costs, according to Rethink Priorities, about 85 cents to achieve one chicken out of a cage, which is really not a lot of money for what is a transformative change in the life of an animal. So corporate campaigns are one of the kind of I think what's great about corporate campaigns is that we have a track record, we've got some evidence, there are some clear outputs that we can measure. Okay, this is a change for animals that we can quantify. It's great if you love your cost effectiveness analysis. I think that corporate campaigns are a great place to go. But they're not the only work that we can do. And I think lobbying and working with government is another quite exciting area. I think one of the sort of slight caveats on this is I think there's a lot of variation in what are like good lobbying campaigns and what are not so good lobbying campaigns. I think you have to think carefully about that and strategically. But the Danish Vegetarian Foundation, which is here, have done a really good example of some particularly effective campaigns. So what they've done is working in Denmark to push the Danish government to release funds for for supporting plant-based food and supporting farmers to transition out of using animal products. And they helped to secure 175 million euros for this. They also successfully sued the Danish Crown, who are a major pork producer, for greenwashing some of their pork products, and took them to court and won this case, which also led to a number of supermarkets in Denmark refusing to put these greenwashing labels onto these products. So they're doing some great work to both pressure the government to implement policies that can help us to reduce the amount of meat products we're eating, and also doing some great work to kind of myth bust around some of the corporate interests that are trying to get people to think that these foods are not a problem from a climate point of view. So they are, again, as I say, a particularly effective charity. Not the only example that work in this space, but one that are definitely doing some great work. And then the final area that I think is particularly important, again, to this point about transitioning away from factory farming altogether, is producing a new food system that can work to give us alternatives. The cultivated meat and alternative protein space is quite exciting. It's not by no means without its challenges, but this is essentially the ability to produce both foods made of plants and also foods that are made of animal cells, so exactly biologically indistinct from animal products, but without the need for sentient beings to be raised and slaughtered in order to produce these things. These we have now licensed products for sale in Israel, Singapore, and the United States. And the Good Food Institute is a great example of an organisation that is spearheading this work. They work to support organisations who are companies that are working in the space with research, with funding, with lobbying support to try to create an environment where these products really can grow and compete. And I think one of the things I would underline is, because it can seem a bit strange to sort of do non-profit work to support for-profit companies, but the meat industry when it comes to agriculture, the meat industry is the largest recipient of subsidy. Most subsidy is actually going to the largest organisations within this space. So if we simply left it up to the market for whether we're going to eat animals or we're going to eat alternative proteins, then the meat industry is definitely playing on a very tilted playing field. So the work of GFI is really important in trying to create even just a little bit more sort of parity when it comes to these companies versus the meat industry. I think that's important to remember also. So these are, I'm running out of time, but these are some three particularly exciting sort of buckets of work: corporate campaigning, lobbying and policy work, and supporting the transition to animal-free food system. But what can you do about this? So if you're excited by these strands of work, you want to work on this issue, what is it that you can do? So the two key bottlenecks in this space are funding and talent. So I'm going to speak very briefly about those. Incidentally, this is, I asked ChatGPT for a picture of David and Goliath, and this is what it gave me, which is terrible. So maybe an intervention is like basic Bible study for AI or something, so you just like do a better job. But anyway, the meat industry is worth about $2 trillion. The amount of money that is donated to charities working on factory farming is about $220 million to $290 million a year. So it's about 1,000 times less money than the meat industry. And then the amount of that that's actually going to like effective charities that are using that money well is going to be even less. So this really is a David and Goliath story. In fact, if David is the size of a normal man, Goliath, in this case, the world's atmosphere comes up to about his navel. Right? So this is the level of scale, which particularly even more so underlines how impressive it is that organisations like THL, DBF, and CFI are making the progress that they are on really an absolutely tiny amount of money versus the problem that they're dealing with. But what this does mean is that there simply isn't enough money in the space to both fund these organisations, they all have funding gaps, and then also look at other things we could do. So the movement is still fairly young. I've mentioned 3 things that I think will work. If we were doing a talk on like global health, we could mention, spend all day mentioning things that have got good evidence for them. There is a lot of unexplored space in the animal space, and a lot of things that we could look at and might be quite exciting interventions, and yet don't maybe get the funding that they need to be fully and properly explored because it is just so funding constrained. So more money would both allow us to scale the things that work really well and also explore the space and find new interventions that possibly will be even more effective than ones. And so I think a really good example actually is the work Dustin does on insects. This is a brand new space, potentially extremely cost effective and exciting, and something that is already struggling for, as a space, struggling for funding. So there's all these kinds of things that we need to explore and look at. Funding is the key bottleneck for all this stuff. I'll skip over that. But actually, so this is one thing I'll mention. So what I mentioned right at the beginning that we are about trying to help you to help factory farm animals without changing your diet. This is a tool we made to sort of underline and do exactly that. So if you go to compassioncalculator.org or just look it up on our website, we built this nifty tool where you can put in exactly what you eat in terms of your meat products and see, based on the cost-effective analysis of the charities we support, how much money you would need to donate to do approximately the same amount of good for animals as your diet is impacting them. And the average Western meat eater would only need to donate $23 a month to roughly offset their the impact of their diet, which I think both underlines why maybe going vegan isn't actually the most impactful thing you can do. You can double it. If you donate $50, you'd be doing twice as much good, roughly speaking, as going vegan would be. But it also, I think, again, underlines just how effective some of these charities are in terms of the outcomes that they make. The second piece that I wanted to touch on is talent. So this is the second bottleneck. I reached out to this organisation here, Animal Advocacy Careers, to ask them about, because they are really the experts in this space, about what they see as the key bottlenecks for talent. And I would definitely recommend them if you want to think about a career in animals as a really good place to go for resources, training, and also they have a jobs board where you can simply just find jobs that you think would fit your skills. But they highlighted to me, globally, the key bottlenecks for talent are particularly in the areas of senior leadership, and particularly senior leadership with specialist expertise. So things like operations specialists and finance specialists. These are particular issues for animal organisations. And then interestingly, while it used to be the case, particularly in Europe, that fundraisers was like the next thing other than senior leadership, Now they're saying that like people who want to do and are working on campaigning is now more of a bottleneck for organisations than fundraising. So if you think you have a particular flair for campaigning, or you're just interested in this kind of work, campaign organising and things like this could be a really impactful place to use those skills that you have. This is one of the key the key talent bottlenecks in space, and something definitely to either upskill yourself in or think about just directly jumping into a role. Yeah, I think that might be it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Tom. We'll move on to questions. I think we've got one question on the slide at the moment, so please do keep on adding, or feel free to stick your hands up. But I think it's a good one to start. Do big differences in culinary culture, e.g. taste versus texture, mean that alternative proteins developed for Westerners might not displace animal products in China?
So the normal model that we look at when it comes to alternative proteins is can we get price parity, taste parity, and convenience? And that tends to be how we think about this. But there is some evidence that even these things aren't enough, and that even if you can achieve parity on all these points, there are other factors that are impacting on the adoption of alternative proteins. My guess is that simply the kind of cultural stuff around both the meat's position in the culture, and also the kind of basic naturalism fallacy that people have around putting new things into their body and stuff is just a very strong thing. So even if even if these things are provably safe, slightly cheaper, and just as easy to get as other meat products, but still there's a bit of an uphill battle to be done. So the short answer is yes. I think that even quite small variations might make these things more difficult. Although I can't name one, I'm almost certain that there are companies working in Asia, and particularly in China, on these products, and will probably be developing those for their local markets. The first country to approve any of these products for sale was Singapore. So I think that the chances of this being developed only for Westerners and without any consideration to the taste palettes and preferences of people in Asia is probably fairly low.
Okay, thank you. Quite an open one, slightly related. Thoughts on lab-grown meat in general?
Yeah, so I think I'm quite bullish on it. I think without lab-grown meat and these cultivated products, I think it will be a much slower and longer road to eliminating factory farming. So when I said at the beginning, I think the end of factory farming is a matter of time, that is predicated on the idea that there is only a certain amount of additional efficiency you can get out of this system, because there are just some really hard limits to how efficient you can make actually raising an animal. And the alternative technologies might be able to quite quickly become significantly more efficient. But you have to have those alternatives. And so if it turns out that there is some some of the current technology barriers in the alt proteins market just are not overcomable for some reason, then I think that would be, I would revise my entire view, but I think that seems unlikely. That I can't see any priori reason why we couldn't get to a space where these products are at least more superior to animal products.
What is your roadmap to ending factory farming, timeline-wise, and also the intervention that you have most faith in?
Why is what the most?
The timeline for ending factory farming, and what interventions do you think you have the most faith in to get us there?
Yeah, so I think I sort of slightly answered that bit a little bit, which is that I think that alternative proteins is a key part of that. I don't think it's the only part. I think my theory of change here is has a lot of components. I think welfare interventions are an important part of this because they raise the salience of the issue. They also we can do things that start to raise the costs of factory farming, so that you sort of can narrow the gap kind of in both directions by bringing down the cost of alternatives and bringing up the costs of animal products. I think this is helpful. But I think the sort of key thing that I'm personally betting on is the success of the alternative protein space as an alternative. How long that will take, I'm definitely not the right person to ask this. I think, though, in general, technologies do move faster than we think they would. With AI moving so quickly, this seems good for, broadly speaking, for this space, in that it will allow us to hopefully make more technological advances more quickly than we might otherwise have done. And so, let's say within the next 50 years, let's do that.
That's good. Do you have any thoughts on why the UK has more free-range chickens than the US?
So, Europe has in general much higher standards than the US on farming. There was in the 1970s particularly a concerted push by the US government to make farming as big and as industrialized as possible. So there was a direct public policy to move toward the sort of most consolidated, biggest industry possible. And I think this trend has had a big impact on this trend, coupled with the sort of adverse environment for welfare regulations, is probably a large contributor to that.
Do you think spending more money on eating organically would be better than eating cheap, less well-grown food and donating to animal charities?
So organic foods, I think someone mentioned it yesterday. There's usually some healthy skepticism about organic specifically, and I think welfare labeling in general is probably not. Welfare labels don't often mean what you think they are. So I would just generally be pretty skeptical about spending money on higher welfare animal products. The chances that you're actually getting something that's meaningfully higher welfare is pretty low. And to go back to my sort of compassion calculator thing, for a very small amount of money, you can do a lot of good, pretty much as much good for your animals as your diet is negatively impacting them. And so I definitely think if you were going to choose between spending money on buying the most expensive eggs in Waitrose or donating the marginal cost of that, those are your only options. I would say you're probably better off by donating the money.
Do you have any advice on encouraging Christians to donate to these causes?
So I think I would prefer people to Justin's talk yesterday, really on this, particularly from the animal point of view. But just to say, as I said, I think the fractional farming is not just about animals. It is about our health, the health of the ability to tackle global hunger, the health of particularly poor and marginalised people who often are the ones who suffer most from major public health crises, and are indeed the people who are suffering most from climate change so far. And so I think more or less whatever you feel are the kind of key issues for you from a short-termist perspective, ethically, this is an issue to take seriously. If only, I did say we're about to talk about the diet change, but there is almost no trade-off in terms of your ability to do good between buying the chickpeas and buying the chicken. And so if nothing else, this is a virtually costless thing you can do to help. And so while I would strongly say that I think a care for animals is entirely consistent and indeed follows from faith, I think that it's very hard to make. I just think it's very hard to make the alternative case that because of my faith I should actively not care about this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some new interventions that don't receive much funding relative to the Humane League that you are particularly excited about?
Yeah, so I think policy space is one that I wanted to highlight in particular. So animal charity evaluators are kind of the give well for the animal space, and they do great work, but they have a particular kind of analysis of what is effective and a theory of change that. From that follows that certain things are less likely to be recommended by them than other things. And I think that policy interventions are an area where maybe they are under scope of the potential impact of these changes. And so if you wanted to look at something where you were I want to do my own research, find something that's super neglected, I think policy is a great place to go. Two other things that are, so one thing that is recommended, but that I think is also very good and probably underfunded is shrimp welfare. So the Shrimp Welfare Project is a charity you can donate to through ACE or through FarmKind. We used to have them on our impact analysis. We took them off because just when people donate through us, they help so many shrimp versus all other animals. It had this like weird swamping effect, and we're not just trying to engage EAs. And so we were like, this is probably going to look too weird to people. But if you just like think all animals are basically equally, shrimp is like one of the it's a great place to put your money. So the Shrimp Welfare Project is a really good place to think about doing it.
Is a venture capital approach to invest in alternative means startups potentially more impactful and also keeps the money long term within the EA community?
I'm not quite sure I understand fully the question. Oh yeah.
If the Omni part is what we're trying to promote, you talked about boosting the Omni startups, let's say, why don't we just actually invest in them like our ABC fund, and then like I said, in 10 years, whatever, we can invest in the next batch. Or if animal farming, African farming is solved, then we can invest in something else and have money left over to spend on things. So also profit basically from
Yeah, I understand. So I think that definitely could be a viable strategy. I think like obviously investing, as in all these things, has like there's a risk involved, right? And you're also not optimizing for doing the most good. You're optimizing for like doing some good and also making a profit. And so you would expect then, if the thing you really, really care about, the thing you want to optimize for is doing good, to this to be like at least somewhat less efficient than just strictly donating. But like if you think that like, oh, I have a reasonable chance of doubling my money and then I can do that later, then I think if if you have a good risk tolerance, like I can see how that could be a good.
We had a question on the offset tool. Someone equalized said that it used the number of animals per year, but the money was calculated per month. The question was around why using different units.
Yeah, so we do that because we think that most people will basically donate once, but we think that if you ideally we want people to donate monthly. If we start with the number of the monthly breakdown, it's a little bit less of a scary number for people. So it's it just seems like something that people might be more likely to kind of go, yeah, I'll do that. So that's why we do that.
Why do you not use also the amount of animals per month? Because then you can kind of compare the two numbers, and now it feels a little bit like a marketing trick to make the numbers.
Just between friends, the honest answer is we are a fundraising organisation. We are trying to reach non-EA people, and so while epistemics is really, really important to us, we think that putting things in, we are marketing, right? That is our role. And so do we try to put things in the most clear, detailed way? No, we try to put things in a way that is not compromising our epistemics, but is as compelling as possible to people who we model basically not really caring that much about this stuff, and really what they want is a quick answer. They have a problem, they want a quick answer to that problem. That's what they care about, right? And so all the detail is on